Welcome back, everybody. This is another episode of Conversations on Anarres. I'm Joseph Orozco, the co-director of the Anarres Project for Alternative Futures. The Anarres Project is a forum for conversations, projects, and initiatives that try to imagine a future free of domination, exploitation, war, and empire. And we frequently have discussions with artists, academics, and organizers who are trying to, in their work, bring about this kind of a future. My guest today is someone who has bridged the worlds of science fiction and philosophy, someone whose work that I've greatly admired. And in particular, something that they have done is to work in a franchise that's perhaps not as well known as some of the ones that we talk about, Star Trek and Star Wars, the world of Battlestar Galactica. This year, 2024, is the 20th anniversary of the reimagining or the reboot of Battlestar Galactica on the Sci-Fi Network. And there's going to be a big celebration of this 20th anniversary in Chicago, Illinois soon. And my guest speaker today is going to be one of the featured presenters at this, giving a discussion about philosophy in Battlestar Galactica. And so I wanted to have an opportunity to speak with him about the work that he does and what he expects to be able to do at the celebration. My guest today is Dr. Jason Eberl. He is professor of bioethics at St. Louis University in St. Louis, Missouri, in the Department of Healthcare Ethics. He's written extensively in the areas of beginning and end of life healthcare, biotechnology, and human enhancement, Thomism, and the philosophy of human nature. But more importantly, for our purposes, he has an extensive catalog of books bridging sci-fi and philosophy. Most notably, the books The Ultimate Star Wars and Philosophy, The Ultimate Star Trek and Philosophy, Sons of Anarchy and Philosophy, and Battlestar Galactica and Philosophy. My guest today is Dr. Jason Eberl. Jason, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation. I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, no, as as I mentioned a little bit in the intro, your work has been something that I've really appreciated for over the years. I use your Ultimate Star Trek and Philosophy in the class that I teach myself in Star Trek and thought, and it's been sort of really influential and inspirational in some sense in thinking that science fiction, pop culture can be a vehicle for thinking about some very sort of serious issues in the world, philosophically, sociologically, and so forth. So I'm really excited to speak with you a little bit about this. So I know, I mentioned that you've done, a long list of different kinds of pop culture and philosophy books, largely for Blackwell publications. And the ones in particular, right, that I'm interested in are the ones in Star Trek, Star Wars, and in Battlestar Galactica. What I always do in beginning in conversations with folks who use these science fiction and fantasy as a vehicle for thinking about the world, I always ask them, how did you become a fan of the genre? Right. So how did you become a fan of science fiction? What originally drew you to thinking or appreciating the genre?
Yeah. So the first thing I fell in love with was the original Star Trek series. I was born in '74, so obviously missed the original airing of them. But the reruns through the probably wasn't till more the early '80s I actually started watching them, and was just fascinating. I mean, those of us who love Star Trek, the original series, can be cheesy and campy at times, but it's just a good action adventure, great characters. Obviously, Spock was fascinating. This whole idea of logic and emotion and balancing that, and also just the idea of being out there, out in the galaxy, out on a starship, pushing, the furthest frontier of human exploration. It's just, I liked going into that world and existing in that universe. Kind of like you said, this universe that Gene Roddenberry and his collaborators, Gene Kuhn and others, created for us, where you know, yes, there's conflict, usually with other alien species and so on and so forth, but humans have largely figured out our issues, the things that we're dealing with now. And it was thoughtful escapism, right? Not long after, got into Star Wars. Of course, it's back when the original trilogy was there. Although, again, because when I was born, the first Star Wars I saw was Return of the Jedi. So that was my entree point into Star Wars, and again, it just grabbed me, especially the theme of redemption in Star Wars. Growing up Catholic, things like you know even the most morally worst person, there's still something there that can be good in them. That really resonated with me. So, that was a starting point for me. Oh,
Yeah,
and I should also say, I also was a big fan of the original Battlestar Galactica series. I did watch that live as it aired in 78, 79.
yeah. I was going to ask you about that. If you were a fan of that, I was too. Around the time I was, real young, um, in elementary school, but that was like a big centerpiece. I remember. I think it was like I remember watching it like on Sunday nights. I think when it came out on
Mhm.
television, and I really appreciate that. And Buck Rogers
Yes, Bud
at the
Rogers. Yeah.
time. Right, that was that sort of interesting kind of renaissance point where there was like a lot of science fiction. I think sort of sparked by Star Wars right after 1977. Um, Thinking about in terms of science fiction, when you think about that today for yourself, are there stories or franchises that you find yourself drawn to even still today?
Yeah. I mean, so obviously, all the ones we just mentioned, because um, they're all continuing in some form or fashion, at least within the past 20 years or so. Battle with the reimagined Battlestar. Yeah, we have constant new Star Wars and new Star Trek. Of course, people some people think the quality or the tonal shift in some of the newer materials being put out there in both those genres doesn't match onto their expectations. But then I always go back to when Next Generation first came out, and Deep Space Nine and Voyager in the '90s, and there were fans complaining about those too, not being real Star Trek. But those are some of my favorites. Deep Space Nine is my favorite series, which of course, Ronald D. Moore, who then wanted to co-create the reimagined Battlestar Galactica, was a writer on. So yeah, I love all the stuff. I mean, I say about both Star Wars and Star Trek, it's like pizza. Even when it's bad, it's still good. It's still pizza, and there's not much that's bad. I really do think that a lot of thoughtfulness are going into the newer series, and really just Star Trek Discovery, Mandalorian, so on both those genres. Of course, the plate has widened with things like Black Mirror. That's a series I really enjoy. Um, uh, just kind of tooling around with all sorts of different ideas. I love how it's an anthology series and kind of like the old Twilight Zone, where each episode is its own unique story. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm into right now.
Yeah, no, that's one of my favorites as well. I was geared to teach a class using one of the Black Mirror and Philosophy collection, I think, which was just really great. But then the pandemic hit, and I decided that probably that was a little too grim of a series to really ponder at the time, and I still haven't gotten over it because the future starts to look more and more like Black Mirror, and it scares me a
Mm,
little bit more. And so I've been trying to focus more on questions of hope, which Star Trek really provides a good sort of vehicle for thinking
mm,
about hope for the future. Um,
exactly.
yeah, and I don't know. We could talk a whole lot about like the quality of different kinds of things, but I agree with you. I mean, I try to watch almost all iterations of Star Trek these days, and including most of the Star Wars stuff that comes out to catch up on things. And I'll admit I kind of did like the Acolyte.
Hmm. Yeah.
Even though that thing was review bombed to death, uh,
Mhm.
and the commentary on that by the fandom was quite atrocious in some ways. And so that's
Oh
something
yeah.
that's changed, I think, a lot in appreciation of science fiction is the way in which these things get taken up in social media.
Hmm.
So That's something to think about. I mean, and perhaps I'll have you back to think about this because you're so much of your work is focused on thinking about the importance of pop culture for academic thinking.
Hmm.
But we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
I did want to talk to you about how you made this intersection. How did you start to think that you wanted to connect your academic work in philosophy with science fiction? Because in addition to co-editing all of these different books that I talked about, you have an extensive sort of academic record with books and articles in your field of bioethics. But what made you decide one day that you wanted to start working in pop culture?
Hmm. Yeah. So my educational background's in philosophy, and philosophy sort of led me into bioethics. And so, you know, the first thing I was attracted to, as I'm studying philosophy through college and grad school, I'm always seeing the connections. And sometimes they're very explicit. Sometimes you have to dig a little deeper to find them. Probably something that was very formative was when I was in grad school in '99. The first Matrix movie came out, and that was a huge, not only cultural event for all of us, but particularly for us philosophers. Like every grad student in the philosophy department went unmasked to go to the theater to go see the Matrix movie. It's like it's Descartes on the screen, it's Plato's cave allegory, it's all this and that. Then um, and so yeah, we were just like uber excited. And then when it came out on DVD, we all started using it in our classrooms, and it's actually I have to say it's kind of a shame nowadays if I just drop a casual Matrix reference to my current undergraduate students, they're like, "Huh?" It's like even though we had the latest movie come out just a few years ago, I don't think it was nearly as widely as popular as the older Matrix films. So yeah, it's kind of like a generational shift there. Again, I can say Black Mirror and they'll know what I'm talking about, um, but yeah. I think the Matrix film in particular really show clearly how you can put philosophy in pop culture on the big screen for the mass audience. And it was right around that time too that originally it was Open Court Press. They still do these books, but there's like four publishers now doing these philosophy pop culture genre books. But it started with the Open Court volume called Seinfeld and Philosophy, which I was also a big Seinfeld fan at the time. So got that book, The Simpsons and Philosophy, and then the third one's The Matrix and Philosophy. So I got hooked with those books. I really enjoyed reading them. What's great about them is it's an edited collection of essays, so you can cover a whole range of topics written by different authors, different perspectives: Western philosophy, Eastern philosophy, existentialism, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, social political. Right, you can cover everything in those books. And uh, the funny thing was the guy who edited the first book, Bill Irwin, he then became the editor for this series that eventually migrated to Wiley Blackwell, and he's still the series editor. Well, I was on the job market, and I was interviewing for a job at King's College in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, where he was on the faculty. And my friend from grad school, Kevin Decker, who co-edited a lot of these books with me, said, "Tell Bill Irwin, I don't care if you get the job or not, but tell Bill Irwin that we want to edit Star Wars and philosophy." And I pitched it, and he's like, "Sure, no one's doing it. Line up contributors." So we basically just rounded up a bunch of our friends and some of our own faculty professors, and put together a table of contents. And that book came out right before episode 3. They like to time these books commercially to come out when there's like a big marquee movie event, and that kind of launched our career in that genre. Bill really liked how the book turned out, so we went back to him and said, "Now we want to do Star Trek and philosophy." And pretty much anytime we make a pitch to him, he's on board with it.
Yeah, that's great. I think I remember reading and had a copy somewhere or another of Seinfeld and Philosophy, and was really
Mhm.
taken by that. That's interesting about that series. I have a question about um, your work in this. You've done quite a few of these. Do you think that these are respected as academic work by academia?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what I would say first it depends on the discipline. I think there's some academic disciplines that are maybe more so. Again, like if you're a film studies scholar, um, maybe if you're in English or some other types of humanities. I will say in philosophy, um, it's not. Yeah, it's something that if you list it on your CV, your resume as this is my scholarship, and that's only what your scholarship is. Yeah, you're not unfortunately going to get a job there. Like how I list them are as teaching publications. So I sort of have my research publications and then teaching publications because they are primarily pedagogical. Like you're not breaking new ground in scholarship usually. You're usually taking your knowledge of something existing, like say Plato's cave allegory, and then showing how a film like The Matrix exemplifies it, so that you're introducing someone who's never read, Plato's Republic, to what the cave allegory is, and then the hope is they'll read your essay because they're a Matrix fan, and then they might actually go read the Republic and read about the cave allegory and learn more that way. So they're kind of a gateway publications in that regard. So as long as they're, in terms of they're serving that purpose, I think because there's a lot of them out there, I think they have gained some traction, some respect. Um, but yeah, they're not designed to be like primary scholarship.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in fact, right, the ultimate Star Trek philosophy is a text that I've used for years in my own class when I teach, social and political philosophy through
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek. I know that I'm friends with Kevin Decker as well and Terry McMullen, who teach
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the work that you do in their Star Wars classes. And I have to say, actually, like one of the best books I've read that I actually sort of opened my mind philosophically was The Expanse in Philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
that collection, which you didn't work on, but it's part of that series.
Mm-hmm.
I really found myself finding new scholarship that I had not found before mentioned in that text.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really impressed with some of the scholarship on it. But I think you're right. But it's primarily really good for students, and students have really always appreciated the way in which these things help them to sort of pick out and become better critical observers of pop culture. Right. So I think that that's also something that it not only introduces students to philosophy, but it helps them to sort of think more carefully about how to evaluate and to think about the pop culture that they like to consume.
No, precisely. And I think another good pedagogical use. So I'm actually teaching a course this semester, that I've taught a few times before, called Bioethics Through Popular Culture.
Uh,
And we're looking at again some sci-fi stuff. We just did an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine in our class the other day. We do like medical dramas like ER, Grey's Anatomy, Scrubs, documentaries. We do all sorts of stuff in that class, even music and so on. And one of my goals with that class is for the students to not only learn about the bioethical issues that we're talking about, and again, kind of be facilitated with that by the film or TV show, but also for them to kind of critically engage how the general lay public learns about bioethics or learns about these issues. So
yeah.
someone might watch the Cider House Rules, which is a very famous film
Hmm.
from the late 90s, where the theme of abortion is a prominent theme in that film. And
Yeah.
so, so how does the Cider House Rules depict abortion and different perspectives on it and so on? Does it do it well or badly? How might it shape the public consciousness of people who view that film? Or say, Million Dollar Baby is another off-cited film about euthanasia.
Hmm.
So that's kind of the idea too, is understanding. Yeah, we need to kind of critically analyze. And again, there's good scholarship being done in this area on the sort of pedagogy of pop culture.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, no, that sounds. I think something that really resonates with a lot of students for sure. I think uh, I'm always kind of curious too. This is just an aside to sort of think about. I know that you sort of teach a lot of these materials. Something that I found a lot of times. I teach classes in pop culture, and um, but I'm starting to find sort of generationally that there's a lot of stuff out there that I just don't know about, particularly in the world of a lot of this kind of pop culture stuff is moving in the areas of anime
Mm,
and video games. video games are becoming so much more a source of sort of sci-fi and fantasy pop culture that it's hard to sort of keep up with a lot of this stuff because
Mhm.
I don't have the time to play all the video games like my students do, and I just don't know the world of anime to the extent that they do. And so, do you see sort of a new horizon of these kinds of texts out there, given the sort of consumption of pop culture by our students?
Oh, very much so. In fact, there are books in the Wiley and the Open Court, genre publishing series dealing with various video games or video game series like Resident Evil and
Yeah.
Halo and stuff like that. And I'm personally not a gamer. I enjoy video games when I do play them, but I often just don't have the time to like get in those deep immersive games.
Hmm.
But one thing I do whenever I teach this bioethics and pop culture course, which I do every few years, I always ask one or two of our graduate students who are getting closer in age to the current generation as I get older, um, to give me suggestions. I'm always collecting
Mm.
suggestions, like wherever they come from, of things that might work, and what are you know what are the kids today, so to speak, responsive to. And I'll give you a great example. It's not about doesn't do with sci-fi, but last time I taught this course was spring of 2021, so we're still in the height of COVID, and my graduate assistant at the time had the great idea. She said, "Okay, we're going to do a class on COVID. Instead of like watching the film Contagion, which is almost like a documentary now, and again, just, as you know, maybe just like too depressing, kind of like you say about Black
Hmm.
Mirror." She said, "Let's have the students submit their favorite COVID memes." And so we collected like 30 odd memes. Some students submitted more than one. And then she organized them like in a temporal sequence, like here are the memes about, first hearing about this coronavirus, and then quarantine lockdown, then, you know, going out for the first time, and then the vaccines. And these are like hysterical memes, but they're also very poignant. And again, a way in which people are expressing their fears, kind of like almost like gallows humor. It's like, oh, I can laugh at this meme because it's so sad what we're dealing with right now. Um, I just thought it was a brilliant thing. I'm going to have students submit in this class. We're going to do a class on AI and healthcare. And actually watch a Star Trek Voyager episode that's very prescient in that regard. But then we're also going to have them submit their favorite AI related memes. Um, and we'll see what we get with that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I can see that working. Uh, and I've also heard of folks who have as assignments the creation of memes using course content and stuff like that. So
Mhm,
that sort of is also becoming a real important vehicle for thinking about all of the kinds of issues that we think about in philosophy through pop culture.
mhm,
Um, Well, let's get down to it. Part of the reason I wanted to talk to you was because your work in Battlestar Galactica (BSG),
mhm.
um, and I want to sort of delve into some of the dimensions of this franchise with you. But you published Battlestar Galactica and Philosophy with Wiley Blackwell in 2008, I believe it
Mhm.
was.
Yep.
Um, and that at the time, that was at the conclusion of the reimagining that started in 2003, 2004 on the Sci-Fi Channel. Um,
So it wasn't quite done yet. Again, the publisher likes to kind of strike while the iron's hot.
yeah.
So it was when the book came out, it was at the end. It was between seasons 3 and 4. So the
Ah.
unfortunate thing is there's nothing in the book about what happens in season 4. Again, kind of like with the first Star Wars book, there's nothing in that about episode 3, which is why I'm glad we got to do subsequent volumes to then kind of go back and talk about like the Nietzschean themes in episode 3 and so on. So unfortunately, yeah, the text is incomplete in that regard.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, now it's the 20th anniversary of the premiere of that series, the reimagining. Uh, uh, Again, a series sort of done partly by Ronald Moore from Star Trek fame, and now on to a lot of other sort of different genres. But um, I wanted to ask what inspired you to do BSG in philosophy back in 2008? Why did you decide that that's where you wanted to go?
Yeah, so I fell in love with the series, from the get go. I mean, it grabbed me right away. Um, Again, being a fan of the original series, but also understanding how kind of cheesy it is in retrospect, and maybe even at the time. but but so you're always kind of skeptical. It's like, oh, what's this going to be like? But knowing Ronald D. Moore's work from Star Trek, I had full faith that like him and David Icke and the others, working with him, they were going to produce a good product. And of course, seeing the cast, Edward James Olmos and some other most of the actors I didn't know of. But definitely, it's like if Edward James Olmos and Mary McDonald think this is a worthwhile project, okay. Um, so yeah, but so the series grabbed me from the get go, and I mean, right away it was asking some of the most poignant existential questions that can be asked. I mean, um, you know, when Adama gives his initial speech at Galactica's decommissioning ceremony, and is like, we fought the Cylon War 40 years ago, but we never asked ourselves, are we as a species worth saving? Are we worthy of survival? And like right away, I'm thinking about the human species, right? Which, well, they're humans as well, but think about us in the real world. And as we think about climate change and other forms of ecological devastation, wars, things we do each other's like, constantly asking that question too: Are we worth saving? If the means necessary in order to save us are so harmful, right, to the planet or so on. Now, to be clear, my answer to that question is, I think we are worth saving. I do think humanity is morally improving incrementally, even though it might not seem like that when you turn on the news. Um, but I do think things are getting better. I think we are inching towards that positive vision of the future that we get from Star Trek. But even in the Star Trek timeline, you got to go through eugenics wars. You got to go through World War III. And so with Battlestar, same thing. You kind of have to go through that great purge of, the devastation that the Cylons bring at the very beginning, in order for humanity to realize, that better future down the road. It takes it's growing pains, right? And so I was just fascinated from the get go. It's like, oh yeah, there's lots here to bring out. Then of course, AI themes related to the Cylons and in my own research, questions of personhood, personal identity, as it relates to bioethical issues. That's my bread and butter. So of course, I'm thinking there's the episode where they realize that the Cylons are susceptible to a particular virus, and that if they can infect the entire Cylon populace, they could basically devastate them. And of course, Hilo, being married to a Cylon, is like objects to this. Like, this is genocide, and that's to me that's one of the most fascinating questions that comes up throughout the series more than once.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you. When I think about this universe, I go back to Adama's initial speech that really sort of setting the tone and sort of setting that challenge. Right, the series is really meant to give us stories that try to answer that question: Is humanity worth saving? Um, and the more that I've thought about, because I'm doing now, I think my third or fourth rewatch of the series. I'm about to come to an end with it, and I'm sort of holding off on the last sort of three episodes because I sort of don't want it to end. It's a weird
Mhm.
sort of thing. I know how it's going to end, but I don't watch the last three episodes in the series. Um, so much of what I see in this universe is, like as you were saying, a really kind of hopeful narrative, right? Of the possibilities, as we talked about before, of redemption,
Mhm.
of forgiveness. All of this kind of comes out, and it's surprising to me. Maybe not so surprising, given that Ronald Moore was part of this. Uh, that in some sense, Battlestar Galactica is really this kind of story about the hope for humanity and the ability for us to be able to work together, to cooperate, and overcome tremendous difficulties to be able to build a new life together. And so, in some ways, the sort of message of Battlestar Galactica is very similar to the Star Trek universe message about the possibilities of humanity.
Yeah, no, it is very much so. And um, if either you or anyone listening, watching, has not listened to Ron Moore's podcast commentaries
Hmm.
that he made, when they originally were coming out DVD. First of all, they're fantastic because, like Ron Moore, I do appreciate a fine cigar and a fine single malt Scotch whiskey. And every episode, every one, he's like, the cigar today is Romeo and Julieta, and the whiskey is Lagavulin 16, and he sits there, and does it, and you can tell like he's in his living room doing this, like he hears the dogs barking. It's like so informal, low key. I love it, and yeah, he'll just sit there and give these great commentaries. But one thing that comes out in the commentary is how much he references often his being raised Catholic. He's not a practicing Catholic anymore, but yeah, his Catholicism is one of those things that has a huge cultural influence, kind of similar to Judaism, right? There's lots of atheist, agnostic Jews, but the Judaism is still informing them, and the same thing I think is true for a lot of Catholics. And again, that redemption theme, that theme that no one is beyond saving, even someone like Baltar, who somewhat inadvertently, kind of on purpose, betrayed humanity, right? I mean, he is directly responsible for the destruction that happens at the beginning of the series, even though he didn't know that's what he was doing, right? He didn't know he was colluding with Cylons, but he, still screwed up big time. And even he is worth saving and undergoes this redemption arc, and things like the healing of the father-son relationship between Admiral Dama and Lee, and then Starbucks arc, right? All these arcs have tremendous lot of redemption happening. So, yeah, it's interesting to kind of see, because again, that makes it relatable to us, who these aren't fantastical characters; these are very relatable, grounded characters.
Yeah, I think that that's right. And in watching this in the rewatch that I'm doing now, 20 years later, um, at the time that this came out in 2003, 2004, this is right in the aftermath of 9/11 and the beginning of the war on terror. And you can see those, themes popping up in the narrative, right? And the sort of the kinds of fears and paranoias that were prevalent in the United States around that time. You can see them popping up in the storylines, like who's a Cylon, like who can we trust, like at any corner a bomb's going to go off. We don't know who we can really trust anymore. So you can sort of see those kinds of things, questions about torture and the legitimacy of torture and things like that, big ethical issues for the early 2000s. But something that I've noticed that's that and maybe it's just sort of me doing over interpretive overdrive, is that the story really speaks now to me as kind of lessons about what to do with reconciliation, um, in a highly sort of polarized society. If you take the Cylons and the humans as trying to figure out how to work and live together, realizing that they need each other, there's a lot of sort of important kinds of lessons, I think, for modern day United States, thinking about dealing with political polarization and the kinds of differences that we have, and what it takes really to make a home together. Right. And what kinds of things can you forgive? What are things that perhaps are unforgivable? So it's been speaking to me a lot in those themes most recently. And so I think that there's a lot of sort of richness going on in the universe that surprised me. I was wondering whether I would find it dated um, in this new rewatch, and I haven't yet.
Yeah. No, that's so wonderfully stated. First of all, what separates great literature, or in this case, great pop culture, from mediocre is that you can revisit that well so many times and not just be entertained by it, but also, again, you can go back to the original 60s Star Trek. The special effects are cheesy, the sets are hokey, the acting is, scenery chewing, but there's still something you can draw of every single, not maybe every single episode. There's some really real clunkers in there, but but the series as a whole, it's like it still can resonate with messages for us today. And so, yeah, I think Battlestar for sure, fits that criteria, being great pop culture media, and something that I think, I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if you remember when the series was I think it was still running or it just concluded. Um, the United Nations was holding a special forum about, and the theme was very much, I think, on the theme of reconciliation and peace building and so on. And they invited some of the cast members: Ronald D. Moore, Edward James Olds, Mary McDonnell. Forget it was at least them. I can't remember who else was there, but to speak at this forum, doing a panel. So United Nations is a BSG fan. It's like, that's a huge cultural impact. And I do think that the themes that you cited are very much there, and something we kind of need to keep revisiting. And let me just go ahead and expound a little bit. I think this is what science fiction in general does really well. Is if you watch, so say during when Battlestar came out, right, we're in the midst of the war in Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq had happened, the George W. Bush administration, and everything, and America, getting more and more polarized. And and if you just watch, say, a movie about the war in Iraq, and you see American soldiers being blown up by IEDs, and there's these insurgents and so on. Yeah, if you're an American viewer watching that, regardless of your opinion about the ethics of the war in general, the justifications that were given, you're still going to identify primarily with the American soldiers as the heroes, and as oh, they get blown up with an ID. It's like, oh, that's horrible. And these suicide bombers, like, how can people do that? Well, then Battlestar Galactica says, okay, let's flip the script, and now we're going to have this imaginary situation, but that's still very realistically portrayed and grounded, where now the humans, the colonials, are the insurgents on a Cylon occupied planet, New Caprica, right? And I feel like we're safe giving spoilers about the series. And so when Colonel Ty turns to suicide bombing as a means of disrupting the Cylon occupation, you're like, oh, wait a second. Now you can maybe sympathize. Again, ethical justifications are a separate question, but you can at least now see the perspective, whether you agree with it ultimately or not, of the suicide bombers, of the insurgents. And it can just kind of cause it, because the main thing about reconciliation is being able to stop demonizing the other, which we're all so prone to do, and as part of that, being able to see things from the other's perspective, right? Whether you agree with it or not, but you can understand they have a reason for what they're doing, right? Aristotle said we all pursue the good as we perceive it. What is the good they're trying to pursue? And maybe that's where we can find the common ground.
Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, the way that I saw season three like that, where the colonials are on New Caprica, to see the lens of some of the speeches that Martin Luther King Jr. gave towards the end of his life, particularly on the Vietnam War. And he exactly says that if we really want to take the perspective of nonviolence and peace onto international relations, we have to do precisely what you said. We have to sort of look to see what is the perspective of the enemy and try to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And it's only then that you start to sort of humanize the enemy, and you start to understand a little bit more about why people struggle, why people fight. As King says, then that sort of throws it back on you to ask yourself, what exactly are you fighting for? What ideals are you upholding? And that can begin that sort of conversation, perhaps, towards nonviolence and the end of conflict. A lot of the other stuff, there's mention too about questions after the New Caprica experiment. All these kinds of questions about. I think President Roslin suggests at a time maybe a Truth and Reconciliation Commission,
Mm-hmm.
stuff that they don't necessarily follow up on. But what's interesting about that is that, season three, season four, you're constantly sort of seeing the repercussions of what happened on New Caprica,
Mm-hmm.
and what happens when you don't deal with these issues, the grievances that remain, and how they fester and then pop up again in new forms of violence. There's so many lessons, I think, in the field that I work in. peace and conflict studies, so many lessons about how different societies have ignored things like the aftermath of genocide, and just comes back in other sorts of ways, other forms of injustice and oppression. And so, in seeing this again for the third or fourth time, I'm just like, wow, this is just like, there's so much rich material, not only for teaching students, but for seeing, in some sense, depicted the realities of violence and oppression and the ways in which they can manifest in our world if we don't adequately think carefully about how to solve them thoughtfully.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Again, very wonderfully stated. Because the I think the one of the, so like I said, after following the new Caprica arc, yeah, there's a general amnesty and this kind of Truth and Reconciliation Commission. They don't obviously call it exactly that, but it's very much inspired by what happened, I think, in post-apartheid South Africa, and the idea that I think Rosalind puts as, we need to hear each other's stories. Both those who fought against the Cylon occupation, those who were collaborators with the Cylons, and we need to, yeah, learn from that, because I'm sure those who were collaborating, so like Gata, for example, working for Baltar, who was president at the time, um, why did Gata do what he did? Right, and he was also helping the insurgency at the same time. It's like you got to hear that story, and then even Baltar's story, and this comes up with a very big theme, that I'm sure comes up a lot of your work, the whole concept of scapegoating. So the French philosopher Rene Girard, and this whole history, going back to ancient times and across cultures, of a culture seeking to sort of purify itself of its cultural sins, its structural injustices, and by putting all the blame on a particular scapegoat. And Baltar serves that role, right? That when he's returned to the colonials by the Cylons and he's put on trial, um, and Leah Dama's speech. I mean, that to me, that scene, it gives me chills just thinking about it. It's such a powerfully written speech, and again expertly delivered, by Jamie Bamber. And he basically like points to Baltar. It's like, you have to pay the price because we don't like you. It's like it's basically just putting all this onus onto this person who, again, Baltar's no angel, he's no saint for sure, but again, why did he surrender to the Cylons? Why allow the Cylons to occupy and leave challenge? Like, what else was he going to do? Right? Would you have done any different if you were sitting in the president's seat? They often say, think about the, something like the U.S. presidency. Again, I have my critiques of various, U.S. presidents, maybe even particularly George W. Bush during, the wars going on at that time and the invasion of Iraq. Um, but there's also a thing about you can't really judge until you've been in that role, right? Unless you're carrying the weight of a nation on your shoulders and have to make those decisions, then it's difficult to judge. You may you can criticize decisions that are made or policies that were adopted and so on, but just like with Baltar, it's like we can't just scapegoat someone and put all the blame onto them. As much as we might, that seems it's too facile a solution, right?
Yeah, I like that. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. That is a very powerful theme as well going through there, and really one of those key scenes, I think, in the sort of post New Caprica uh, environment. Something else that I'm thinking about now as you're talking about this is, and I hadn't realized this before. Um, when I'm teaching Star Trek in particular, what I've taught my students to think about when they're watching a Star Trek episode is to not identify with Starfleet and the Federation. I tell them, um, you may want to think that they're us, but those humans depicted there are not us because they've undergone, right, all the crises, and they've gone through the challenges, and they've come out on the other end into a future where there's no war, no sexism, no structural injustices on Earth, right? They're not us. They're what we could aspire to. And so when you see that those humans going out in the universe encountering new civilizations, don't necessarily assume that they're us. Instead, what I tell my students is when they encounter some other planet and they find some alien culture that they're trying to interact with, try to realize that those alien cultures are typically us.
Hmm.
right? So that Starfleet is interacting. It's like, what is our idealized self deal? How does it deal with our actual self? What I'm thinking now with BSG is that BSG is interesting because it's going through a lot of these challenges, but those colonials are us
Hmm.
in a lot of ways, in the really gritty, emotional, morally compromised ways that we go about the world. They're doing that as well, and so it's interesting is that the identification is much more sort of realistic in that kind of sense. Makes it, in some sense, really a kind of a more poignant story in a way that you don't have to do all these kinds of abstractions and in identification that you might have to do with Star Trek.
Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, BSG, of course, was not trying to be anything like Star Trek. Um, they certainly couldn't do it with Edward James Olmos because he famously has said, I'm sure you've heard his interviews, he's like, the minute some alien in a rubber costume, you know, shows up, I'm going to clutch my heart, gasp, and fall to the floor dead. Adama's dead. There's no Adama the moment that happens. And and so yeah, it's about, again, it's really about these two cultures: the Cylon culture, the human culture. And of course the Cylons were created by the humans, so it's really just extensions of one culture in a story that, again, the BSG fans know all this has happened before, all of it will happen again, because again, we don't follow George Santayana's advice of learning from history, and so we're doomed to repeat it, right? And I think that's particularly a poignant message because, even I think even more so with, and again, I'm talking very specifically about American culture. I think it's maybe more universally true of all humans, but I think we see it particularly in U.S. culture that our cultural memories are very short. Not just about pop culture. Whereas I can, like I said, I've referenced the Matrix, and my students are like, "Huh, that's ancient stuff." But again, going back to, I remember, I know I keep dipping the well of the Iraq War, but again, that's what was happening at the time BSG came out. And but I remember during that people were shocked when a picture was going around of Donald Rumsfeld, who's Secretary of Defense at that time, previously back in the 80s, shaking hands with Saddam Hussein, who we just overthrown, as the enemy, right? Because the US was supporting him in his war against Iran in the early 80s. And so, again, that memory gets forgotten as we want to create a new cultural narrative to, again, justify a war, whatever it is we're trying to do. Um, so I think that's just something that happens a lot, and it's part of a human culture. And so, um, and so, if we, again, going back to Santayana, well, if we don't engage in that cultural memory, if we don't bring the past forward, then again we're kind of, doomed to repeat it. Um, and again, so yeah, I agree with you 100% that Battlestar is, the humans there are very much us, and unlike Star Trek. And in fact, just a little side comment, the thing about Star Trek is, as much as it's all about interracial harmony among humans and everything, it's kind of speciesist. Because you got like the Ferengi, or like the ultra capitalists and so on. And I'm doing a rewatch of Deep Space Nine right now, and Cisco is kind of speciesist about the Ferengi. Like, he doesn't want Jake hanging out with Nog. He just thinks that the Ferengi are like these no good nicks that no one should hang out with. Of course, that changes over time, and Quark in the later episode actually calls him out on that. Basically, you don't like Ferengi. You're prejudiced against Ferengi, and Cisco has to admit that he is. So that's just a little side comment about Star Trek, that even the humans there still have some of their flaws.
Yeah, that's true, right? And lots of different ways in which the flaws of humanity then get sort of shunted onto like our interactions of the humans' interactions with alien species in various ways, and those kind. But within humanity, right? And this is part of sort of Roddenberry's sort of Bible, right? Is that there's no conflicts amongst the humans, but all of the problems that we want to explore about real humans then have to be turned into problems with aliens.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but I want to talk to you about this project that you're going to be involved in the next few weeks. You're going to be the featured or one of the featured presenters at the 20th anniversary celebration of Battlestar Galactica that's being done in Chicago in October 2024. And so there's going to be a sort of mini con. Most, if not all, of the cast are going to be there. Ron Moore is going to be
Yep.
there as well. And it's going to be sort of all weekend BSG celebration honoring the franchise. Um, what are you going to be talking about there? How did you get this gig in the first place? And what are you going to be talking about? And what are you looking forward to seeing there at this celebration?
Yeah. So how I got involved was I had done a previous. I was part of a panel at one of the Star Trek conventions that's held in Las Vegas every year. It was a couple years ago, and we did a panel on medical ethics in Star Trek. And we even got one of the other panelists was connected with John Billingsley, who played Dr. Phlox on Star Trek Enterprise, and he was even part of the panel with us because we were talking about some of Phlox's decisions and so on. Um, so that was another, that convention is put every by creation conventions, right? The big. So I got to know some of the creation folks through that. So yeah, the moment I saw that the BSG thing was happening, I immediately emailed my contacts at Creation and just said, "Hey, I don't know if you're planning to do any sort of like academic panels like we did at the Star Trek one, but if you are, I here's a pitch." What I pitched them was um, the for the theme I want to do. I pitched them an article that I co-wrote, written with another colleague of mine, Jeff Bishop, um, on Battlestar as biopolitics. Biopolitics is this notion, again, it comes from Michel Foucault, French philosophers, others who talk about biopolitics, but it's the idea of how we control and manage life, and specifically the body, through political machinations. So if we think about things like reproductive rights, which of course comes up in Battlestar Galactica, but even something as simple as Rosalind keeping that count on her little whiteboard of how many people, right? That's a form of biopolitics. And the decision she makes later in the series about, making abortion illegal in order because we need to, repopulate the species. So that, and then of course you have the Cylons who have their farms where they're using human women as reproductive engines. Also questions that come up about euthanasia and so on, genocide. So and then even the very if you also tie in the series Caprica, which we do in this chapter. This is a chapter for that we wrote for a different book that someone else was doing on Battlestar as philosophy. So in other words, we were able to look at the series as a whole, including Caprica, and kind of say, is there a sort of overarching philosophical message, whether it was intended by the writers or not? Like, I'm not saying Ron Moore read Foucault and then wrote, he and David Icke put the series together, but it's kind of like if you do watch the whole arc of the entire Battlestar, modern Battlestar saga, this theme of biopolitics and biopolitical control and bioethics, it's there throughout. So we just kind of pull out those themes, and again wrote this essay again using it to teach things like Foucault and Giorgio Agamben and these other thinkers working in that tradition. Um, and so yeah, I basically pitched that, and they said, yeah, we'll put you on the program. And so I'll be going. Unfortunately, Jeff's not able to come with me. But yeah, I'll just kind of present our work, and again, like what I like about it, it's something that we can kind of connect a continuity, a thematic continuity throughout the entire, from Caprica all the way through to the very end.
That's exciting. That's exciting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can sort of see a lot of that going on. I was thinking about, in thinking about our talk today, I started to think about all of the different kind of bioethic themes. There's a lot of sort of richness there in sort of thinking about like biopolitics. I think in BSG, just primarily because of the ways in which we think about the creation of the Cylons. There's AI questions, but then in the reboot, right? There's the questions of these synthetic humans that are created by the Cylons, or Cylons that are looking like they're artificially created humans, right? And so the question is like, well, what are they? What's the moral status of them? And that's something that is constantly popping up through the series. Um, what are you excited to do at the celebration itself? What are you looking forward to seeing or doing there?
Yeah, I mean, mostly just connecting with other BSG fans because this is, I mean, there probably were some BSG themed conventions like back in the day when the show was first on. I didn't go to any. Obviously, you go to a general Comic Con or Sci-Fi, you'll meet some fellow BSG fans. But this is the first time I'll be going to a dedicated BSG themed conference and just connecting with people who consider as passionately as I do. And then to hear the reminiscences from like you said, I think pretty much uh, most, if not all, of the major and minor cast members, are going to be there. Um, and I've heard a few of them speak before. I've got to meet Katie Sackhoff, Edward James Olmos, a few others throughout the years. But yeah, just to kind of hear the reminiscences. And then I'm also very excited for Ronald D. Moore to be there because, like I said, his podcast commentaries throughout the series on Blu-ray are gold. So he's has a very I think unique person. I'm just a big fan of his work from the Star Trek stuff he did. If I look at some of my favorite Next Gen and DS9 episodes, who wrote them? RDM. Um, and then I love his new series. I don't know if you've been watching For All Mankind, which is for those listening who don't know, it's a alternative history of what if the Soviet Union landed on the moon first. That's what happens in the first scene of the first episode. And then how does the ripple effect of that change the course of human history? And what's interesting about that show is Ron Moore said, For All Mankind is the precursor to Star Trek. It's kind of filling in the gaps of how we got from here to there, to that future. And so it's just bad. So again, it's like I said about Battlestar 2, it's kind of showing humans as they are now, building towards what may be that Star Trek utopian vision of the future. And so, that's clearly infusing the way Ron Moore just thinks about all the shows he works on, at least all the sci-fi shows. So yeah, just this kind of I'm sure I'll pop down some money for some autographs and photo ops. I do have to share. I know this is braggy, but my one of my biggest highlight fan moments ever in my life was when I did a meet and greet, paid for the photo op with Edward James Olmos, and I brought him a copy of the Battlestar Galactica and Philosophy book, and I gave it to him, and then he posed like holding it as we're having our picture together, and then he turns to me and says, "Will you sign it for me?" Like he asked for my autograph. I was like floored, and then I had to take time to think about even what to write and say and present it to him. But anyways, um, yeah, it's just an amazing cast, and so just looking forward to hearing from all of them.
Wow, I'm so envious. So like one of my bucket list items is to meet Edward James Olmos and to just let him know how much I appreciate his lifetime of somatic contributions in a lot of ways. And he makes Battlestar Galactica so much for me. Yeah, I'm so envious of you being able to go to this. I don't think I'm going to be able to justify the expense to go out to Chicago for the weekend to do this. I mean, it would be a great thing, but I think I would plunk down too much money just to be able to see these folks, and I don't think I can justify that right at the time. Katie Sackhoff, right, of course, lives up in Portland, Oregon, just
Mm-hmm.
skip up the river from me. So I'm hoping that I can run into her soon. But I've been hoping that there will be more BSG folks doing sort of a Comic-Con circuit, and I haven't really seen very many of them doing stuff in that kind of way. At least along the West Coast. And so I've been sort of
Mm-hmm.
disappointed that BSG hasn't sort of had more of a presence at different sort of conventions around. But no, I think that sounds great. I'm very excited for you, and I'm thankful for you to sort of opening up more philosophical spaces in these places. I think that I always have the best fun when I'm able to do these kinds of presentations at cons and great conversations with people. And I was just at Rose City Comic Con here in Portland, Oregon, about 2 weeks ago, and we had done a presentation, I think, in 2020, talking about using sci-fi in higher education.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just standing around in my BSG uniform. I was cosplaying BSG at Rose City, and a woman comes up to me and she says, "Hey, did you do a presentation at Comic Con a few years ago?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she said, "I just want to tell you like how grateful I was."
Mm-hmm.
She was working on her master's degree on the question about representations of superheroes in pop culture. And she said that when she saw us talking about the way that we use this work, it really validated for her that what she was doing was important. Because graduate school, for many of you, right, if you don't know, can be a really sort of soul-sucking and also invalidating experience for a lot of people. They don't understand what they're doing, or they get caught up in their work. But she said that it made a difference to see people talking about this kind of stuff. So thank you for the work that you do and for providing sort of the avenue for this in so many of the ways of your publication. I think that what you're doing is really making a big difference. Um, with that said, where is your work going now?
Mm.
Do you have future plans for continuing some of this stuff in pop culture and science fiction?
Yeah, I mean, as long as they'll keep publishing my books, I'll keep working on them. I really enjoy doing them. One of the things I absolutely love, and in addition to the ones I've edited, I also will write chapters for other people's books. I did one recently for Westworld, right? So the rebooted Westworld series on HBO, and it was on. I was writing on the question of whether Westworld can create or corrupt virtue, like actually by participating in the fantasy reality can actually shape your moral character. And I focus on different characters, but particularly Ed Harris's character, the Man in Black, is kind of the key touchstone in there. Um, the current books I just finished co-editing with a couple colleagues, a book that'll be coming out within the next few weeks on Joker and philosophy. So the Joker character in all his incarnations, comics, animated series, um, you know, obviously the Heath Ledger and Joaquin Phoenix versions with Joker Folie à Deux coming out. So again, that's like I said, the publisher's like when a marquee event's happening. So it's like, hey, we got this new Joker movie. Let's get a Joker and Flossie volume out there. Even the Cesar Romero Joker from the '60s Batman gets a couple nods in various chapters. So I'm really happy with how that book turned out. Yeah, Joker and Philosophy. Um, and then, like I said, I would love to do a third Star Trek and Philosophy book because the last one we did was before any of the Kurtzman, what's now called the Kurtzman era reboot, or not reboot, but the Kurtzman era series. So Discovery and Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, and Prodigy, and so on. So there's a lot there in all those series that we could certainly put together a really awesome third volume. So hopefully that will come out within the next couple years. We get the publisher to sign on for that. But yeah, Joker and Philosophy, and some with it's an October release date. It's coming out a couple weeks before the movie does.
Yeah, exciting. That's great.
Yeah.
I look forward to that. Any hopes for more work on BSG?
Well, so there's constant rumors about a new BSG film or another
Yeah,
reimagining. I have mixed feelings about whether I want it reimagined again, or I
yeah.
mean, you can't really continue the RDM story because of how the series ends. At most, you could tell new stories within that timeline, right? Or do another prequel series between Caprica and BSG. I don't know, but my hope would be that yes, if there is some sort of another BSG reboot, that it'll give us the opportunity to go back and first of all, yeah, like I said, kind of complete that volume, like to
Hmm.
talk about the whole series, including season 4, including Caprica, um, and tying it. And there's also Blood and Chrome and
Blood and
the
Chrome. Yeah.
Plan. Right, there's those couple movies. So yeah, there's lots of still material there that we didn't get a chance to mine in that first book. And so yeah, I would love to revisit it if we get the opportunity. But yeah, the publisher, they want to know, we people don't want to the publisher's perspective. People don't read a book about 20-year-old series. I don't necessarily
Yeah.
share that, but they got the business people. So yeah, if there's something we can market it around, then yes, I would definitely be diving back to the BSG well.
Yeah, it's hard to justify that anymore, like with because of streaming, because stuff sort of is everlasting in some ways or another. But I understand from the money making aspect about that. Well, if you do decide to do a new BSG, count me on board. I'd love to take
Definitely,
be involved in that. That sounds great.
that'd be
Um,
awesome.
Thank you, Jason. I really appreciate your time and attention today to talk about this stuff. BSG is probably like in my top 3 franchises because of the richness of its storytelling and And just that, and last night, in thinking about this too, I sort of sat around and I watched, I don't know how many YouTube videos, which were just like the best battle scenes from Battlestar Galactica. And it was just like, I think I spent like half an hour just watching all these different kinds of battle scenes. It's still sort of captures like the imagination of trying to sort of see these great space battles going on. So BSG is like, you can find almost anything. Deep philosophical thinking, if you're into military sci-fi, all of this kind of stuff. If you're just sort of nostalgic for the 1970s series, all of that stuff is there. And so I really appreciate your time in talking with me today about this. And good luck in Chicago. And I hope it's a lot of fun. And good luck on the rest of your work, especially with the Joker now.
Thank you very much, and best of luck to you on your work. Again, I'm also a fan, and you're doing important work in this area as well, and in your scholarship on peace and conflict. And yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. Hoping to have another one
Oh,
soon.
thank you. Yeah, thanks very much. Let's keep in touch. And thank you everybody for tuning in and listening to us. Uh, you can find the Anarres project on social media all over the place. We're on Facebook, Instagram, uh, X, formerly Twitter, Thread, Blue Sky, Mastodon. And you can listen to our audio podcast on Spotify. If you're listening to Spotify, you can find us on YouTube and watch us there. Thanks again, Jason, and look forward to talking with you soon. And I'll end here by saying, live long and prosper. So say we all.
And may the force be with you.